Welcome back to Close Up, joined now by State Party Chair, Democratic Party, Ray Buckley. Good to see you, sir.
Great to be here.
I know you're a busy man these days. Certainly a interesting year so far. Yes, it is. Let's start with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and the discussion we just had a moment ago about the superdelegates and the process and the nominating, and Bernie Sanders says it's rigged. I don't get it. But it appears that the suggestion is that the superdelegates mitigate the popular vote. So what's the point?
Well, here in New Hampshire, the superdelegates have always supported the person who's going to be the nominee. We've had superdelegates since 1984, and they've unanimously, no matter who they supported in the primary or if they were even uncommitted. So if Bernie Sanders is ahead by popular vote and by delegates going to the convention, I absolutely believe that all of New Hampshire superdelegates will line up behind him. That's the way we've always done it since 1984.
Is it a broken process, though, do you think? I mean,
well, we're going to look into that. You know, there are some that passionately believe that, and there are going to be lots of opportunities. There's not an opportunity to change the system between now and the convention. The way the process is, it's multi-layered, and I've looked into that, and we'll have plenty of time after the election. Right now, I think the people of New Hampshire are a lot more concerned about Donald Trump and Kelly Ayotte.
Well, I know, and we'll get to that. I know you want to talk about it, but let's talk a little bit more about Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, because, you know, the thinking is, particularly in the Sanders camp and his supporters, is that this, you know, this was predetermined, this outcome. The National Democratic Party, the State Democratic Party were basically arms of the Hillary Clinton campaign. But yet, if you look,
I don't think too many people say that about the New Hampshire Democratic Party.
The Republican New Hampshire Party will say that.
Because, you know, I remember I walked in with Bernie when he filed to make sure that Secretary of State accepted his nomination as filing a candidacy as a Democrat. I appeared before the Ballot Law Commission testifying he was a Democrat. And the Sanders campaign says that it was completely even-handed event after event. Now, obviously, some people are a little over-enthusiastic and may have interpreted one thing or another differently, but clearly we did a terrific job here in New Hampshire.
Is there any discussion going on, though, behind closed doors with Democrats, you know, established Democrats who are looking at the polls and saying, sheesh, you know, according to the polls here in New Hampshire, one person that can win is Bernie Sanders. He beats everybody.
Well, and we're very excited the fact that both Secretary Clinton and Bernie Sanders has a significant lead over Donald Trump. Last poll, your last poll, had Hillary Clinton leading by 19 points. That would be a historic Democratic wave here in New Hampshire. And
I don't think it was 19. It was closer than that. But I see what you're saying. But a lot of people wonder if she's a flawed candidate in the general election, and if Donald Trump, who just seems to be the Teflon Don, everything bounces off of him, will ultimately be able to even overcome that.
Well, I've been with a lot of candidates that have been leading it at this level, and it's switched back and forth. There's a long time between now and November, but I'm very confident that we're going to have a great Democratic year here in New Hampshire.
Would you go so far to say that Bernie Sanders would be a safer bet in November?
I think that that the delegates and the Democrats across the country will decide that, and I will enthusiastically support whoever the nominee is.
I'll let you off the hook now. And I'm sure you want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump and the impact that he might have on down the ticket, because a lot of people are wondering about that. Some think that, you know, maybe this thought that he's going to be a liability to Kelly Ayotte and all the Republicans on the ticket might not, you know, come to fruition. He could
I think that Donald Trump will do very well in certain states, but I don't believe he's going to do very well in New Hampshire. No Republican since 1988 has received 50% of the vote running for president here in New Hampshire, and Donald Trump is certainly not at the caliber of Presidents Bush's or any of the others. So we're looking for a terrific year. You know, the most embarrassing thing, of course, is the fact that Kelly Ayotte this past week made herself a national punchline by saying that she will support but not endorse. It's never good when one of our elected officials becomes the butt of a joke across the country.
Well, and there's no one here to defend Kelly Ayotte, so I will say that, you know what, that's not an unusual statement. Politics is politics. You hedge your bets
I've never heard that before.
Well, you have Paul Ryan saying basically the same thing. I mean, so go ahead. Whack at that. He's like, well, you know, we got to get behind the Republican Party's got to unite. We got to support whoever our nominee is. I'm not ready to endorse Donald Trump. It's not an uncommon thing to say. And when you say a punchline, you know, there's a lot of politics associated with this. But are you at all concerned, or do you believe that there's internal concern that the Trump energy or whatever this is has been building up over time is being underestimated by the Democratic Party?
It may in other states, but one thing I do know about, and that's New Hampshire, and it's not going to be in New Hampshire. We're going to have a terrific year in New Hampshire.
What is happening, by your estimation? I mean, we just had Burt Cohen and Jim Merrill talking about the energy. Is it the same energy that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump have tapped into, or is there a difference?
Not at all. While there might be some populism messages that might overlap slightly, and they might have entertained a number of people who were not readily engaged, there was significant difference. The difference between the people that Donald Trump engaged was out of anger, and the people that Bernie Sanders engaged was out of hope. And those are two different lookout on life. So Bernie Sanders folks, and we've heard in the last couple of days that New Hampshire's top Bernie supporters absolutely believe that they will unite with if Secretary Clinton happens to be the nominee behind her candidacy. So I think that we're going to have a strong year here.
What do you think she has to do to pull those supporters over from Bernie Sanders?
I think that it's going to be a fascinating conversation that's going to happen between Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton, and then I think it'll go down from there.
Do you think you have to overcome anything but what we know, anything different seems to be what's more acceptable than anything else? And Hillary Clinton is obviously well-known establishment. Is that something that needs to be overcome in the general election?
I think that when you get to a general election, it's so entirely different. I was at the Democratic Convention in 1988 when Mike Dukakis left the convention in Atlanta, leading the George W. Bush, H.W. Bush by 19 points. So a lot of things can change. I went to the convention in '92, and Bill Clinton was in third place, and he left in first place and never looked back. So we've got a long time from the convention to the general election, but at the end of the day, I think that New Hampshire is going to be a great big blue state.
Well, let's talk about the issues you think are going to define this race, and I'm sure you'll take your shots as well. But what do you think when voters head to the polls they're going to be thinking about? National security, the economy, pocketbook issues, the heroin problem here in New Hampshire?
I think you take every single one of those issues, and Donald Trump scares the bejesus out of most traditional voters here in the state of New Hampshire. There might be some fringe that might be excited about his cocky attitude internationally, but I don't think the average voter here in New Hampshire has anyway embraced that sort of attitude.
So you suspect that 35% that he won with, or whatever the number was, I'm a little bit off back in the primary.
And that's 35% of the Republican primary, so you factor that into a general election, and it's nearly an insignificant number.
But he pulls those independents, too. He does well with the independents, and that's something that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump would need. And there's, I would imagine, a recognition of that within the campaigns.
I think it's a small number, but we're looking forward. The interesting thing is that the entire Republican ticket embraces Donald Trump's issues, whether it's anti-women's health care, anti-climate change, against raising the minimum wage, pocketbook issues, foreign policy, on and on and on. They're all in lockstep with Donald Trump, and that's why I'm looking forward to a great year.
I think some might disagree with you about the term lockstep. Are you at all concerned about the fact that the presidential race is overshadowing everything else? I mean, obviously, it's a high-profile race between Senator Ayotte and Governor Hassan. But the governor's race, nobody's talking about the candidates yet. Nobody knows who they are.
Well, we heard that a lot in 2012, and there was a lot of belief by some that Ovid Lamontagne was going to handily be elected governor in 2012, and I never believed that. We haven't lost a gubernatorial election, a presidential year, since 1992. I think that we're going to do very well in the governor's race, as we will in the Senate race and the congressional and all the way down the ticket.
And of course, energy is a big thing when it comes to
energy,
turnout.
Organization, and certainly we've got the Republicans beat on organization. So when you've got the best candidates, the best message, and the best organization, that's the way you do it.
And I will end on that. And we only have about 30 seconds, but we talk about organization, and that is a very important component. Donald Trump, he wrote a lot of his celebrity here, got a lot of TV time, but many people question, did he have the ability to get the vote out, especially against a machine, well-organized campaign like Hillary Clinton? You must feel pretty good about it.
If you look at 2014, the reason New Hampshire Democrats stood alone across the country is because of our amazing grassroots operation that we have. When Governor Hassan, Senator Shaheen, and Congresswoman Custer were reelected, when people in similar districts or states across the nation were falling by the wayside, and we withstood it. And so we're even better, bigger, and stronger.
All right, so you're not getting tired of the job, then?
No, I love it.
How many years have you been on it? I'll see you later.
9 years, I guess.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.